Hi, everybody. You're listening to Comics and History, episode number 118, Canada Day 2018 special. A look at Sam Noir and Matt Tavares, the Victorian Four. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session for a special Sunday edition of Comics in History. I'm releasing this one day early because this year, July 1st, aka Canada Day, falls on a Sunday. And because this is a Canada Day special, you gotta know that I am reviewing a great piece of Canadian comics work, a very recent piece of work, which is very thankfully an ongoing. So it's one of those series which I hope to check in on from time to time here on the show. Now, you heard me mention the name Sam Noir in the title, and I reviewed his works a little under a year ago when I was looking at a whole block of great Canadian comics content. And so for those of you who listened to my episode focused on Sam's work, you'll know that he is a comics writer, a master sketch artist, as well as a toy maker extraordinaire. A multifaceted, multi-talented comics artist and a real patron for the comics art world as well. I've met Sam on more than one occasion now, and it's a pleasure to speak with him every time. Not only is he a very gracious gentleman who is very respectful towards those who pick up and show interest in his work, but he's also a great fan of the comics medium as well. Now, when I was speaking about his works back in the fall, I was talking about his one and done type stories. Sam is actually a master when it comes to writing the one and done story. He tells these brilliant comic stories in 10 pages or even less. I've read a couple of his collected books in which he can tell a really neat joke all in the space of one or two panels. And if I didn't mention it back in the fall, I need to mention it here. There are a lot of really well-established comics writers for DC and Marvel who could really do to read Sam's work and take a page out of his book on writing comics, because today so many stories are written for the trade. They're very decompressed, and you don't get that with Sam's work. Within the space of 10 or slightly more than 10 pages, you get a very well crafted story with a really good beginning, middle, and end. It was back in, I want to say, February or March that Sam contacted me and let me know that he was beginning an ongoing series called the Victorian Four with his art partner, Matt Tavares. It had me really excited when I heard him say that it was an ongoing which he was writing, because I really was curious to see what an ongoing series from Sam Noir would look like. Now, of course, I've read and thoroughly enjoyed Zip Kramer's Savior of the Cosmos, but that isn't what I would call an ongoing serialized story. That's more of a really great collected edition, which contains really neat chapters that serve as their own individual stories, but then when you put them together, you get this really great non-linear story about the hero Zip Kramer. And it's something which Sam and his art partner on that project, Marvin Law, can come back to at different points when it strikes their interest. For instance, in the recently released anthology Strange Romance, there's a new story about Zip that looks at him when he was much younger. So you can put all of the various Zip Kramer stories together, put them in a different order if you want to get a linear story told to you that way. But it's not an ongoing series in the traditional sense. I do have to mention, though, I met Sam more recently at the Toronto Comics Art Festival this past May, and we were speaking about Zip Kramer, and I told Sam that I saw certain parallels between Zip and Booster Gold. And it was interesting. Sam told me that at first Zip wasn't a character that he was entirely interested in. It was Marvin who called him up and said, let's do some more stuff with Zip Kramer. And so Sam said, okay, sure. And it's really neat to see how Zip's story has evolved over time. And you can really tell that that's a true work of love by both Sam and Marvin. And not surprisingly, Sam told me that when he was writing Zip, he didn't have Booster Gold in mind. However, he, like myself, is a big fan of Booster Gold, as he was written by Jeff Johns and Dan Jurgens during the pre-Flashpoint era. So just wanted to share that little anecdote with you. So getting back to the Victorian 4, again, I found out about it in February or March. Sam was good enough to send me a digital preview copy of one of the issues. It's currently on issue number 2. There's been a 0 issue as well as the traditionally numbered 1 and 2 issues. And in seeing Sam at Comic-Con and at Toronto Comics Art Festival, I didn't see the 0 issue in print. But if you go to the Android store or to the App Store for Apple and you find the Taptastic app, you can actually download the 0 issue of Victorian 4. You have to download it a page at a time, but it's a quick, easy download. And it's actually a really important issue to read. There's some very important setup material in that 0 issue leading into the regular ongoing. And the neat thing with the 0 issue is that Sam, and probably Matt as well, invited other artists who Sam has worked with in the past, such as Christopher Yao, to provide their rendition of a page or two from the 0 issue. But it wasn't until March when Victoria and I went to Comic-Con that I was able to pick up issues 1 and 2 of Victorian 4. And as luck would have it, Matt was there at the booth with Sam. And I asked them if this was a series which they saw as having a finite run. Did they have a particular number of issues in mind? How far did they see themselves taking this story going forward? And I remember Matt looking at me and saying, until we die, which made me say, okay, good enough. Because I really like series that are ongoing. I mean, there have been some great series that have been produced through Top Cow or Image, which do have a finite run. But I'm a traditionalist in that I like things like Action Comics and Superman and Green Lantern, and that there's no definitive end. They'll keep on going. And with the Victorian 4, I certainly feel like there is a whole lot of story that can be told with these characters. I can see there being years worth of ongoing story arcs, one and done stories. It's just a really neat concept that Sam and Matt have come up with. So needless to say, I've devoured the 0, 1, and 2 issues and cannot wait for issue number 3 to come out. So let me first give you the premise behind the Victorian 4, and then afterwards I'm going to tell you why you should buy this series. Actually, let me say this up front right now because I certainly don't want to forget about this later on. For those of you who live in Toronto or the GTA and are able to get to different comics shows, Sam goes to a lot of different comic shows and festivals. I'll be looking forward to seeing him at Word on the Street at Harbourfront Centre in September. So certainly you can see him at a show, pick up his books there. But if you also go to studiocomicspress.com, comics in this case is spelled with an X, you can also inquire about ordering copies of his work, and I should actually include a link to that website in the show notes on the Comics in History Facebook page. And I'd say the best thing to do is to get in touch with Sam over Facebook. He has a personal page, but he also has different pages which he is an administrator for, and he has one page as well for his works. So the best thing to do is go to Facebook, go to the search engine and type in Sam Noir, Noir, and then you'll find his Facebook page for his works. And he's always very good about getting in touch, replying to queries from those who are interested in his work. So let's get into it. Don't want to get into major spoiler territory here. I want to focus on the broad premise of the Victorian 4, tell you about the different characters who appear. So minor spoilers here, nothing page by page, no big plot reveals here. Spoilers which come out and talk about the characters. So again, I mentioned that the 0 issue was very important because it introduces us to the main threat facing this world. First off, the Victorian 4 is a steampunk story. It takes place in I'd say the late Victorian age. Features a combination of characters both from the real world and the literary world. So in the 0 issue, we are introduced to the concept of an alien conspiracy, and it appears to be involved in terms of resurrecting dead heroes, whether from the real world or from the literary world. And what makes this conspiracy really interesting is that it's not your straight up conspiracy where the aliens are coming to Earth and performing experiments on humans in order to subjugate the human race. We may well see elements of that come out further on down the road, but right now what's really interesting about this alien conspiracy is that there are a fair number of aliens who themselves appear to be victims of this conspiracy. And so, tasked with confronting the alien conspiracy and finding out its roots and its end goal and shutting the whole thing down is the Victorian 4. And it's a really interesting cast of characters. We're introduced to Abraham Lincoln, the former president of the United States, who was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. In this story here, President Lincoln has been resurrected. He has come back as a vampire. And due to the nature of his assassination and the fact that he's gone through this pretty traumatic resurrection, he's got significant gaps in his memories. But the one thing that we learn is that Lincoln fears that he did some pretty awful things during his early days as a vampire. And so he has a great sense of remorse. He has control over himself now, but he certainly wants to atone for those things which